Hello, and welcome to another G.I. Joe New News review. I am here with my special guest today. I'm David Allen, or if you'd like, you can call me Super Dave. I am here with Robert Atkins and Brian Atkins today to speak to them about Renegade Game Studio and all the cool G.I. Joe stuff that they are working on today. Welcome, Brian, and welcome, Robert.
Yes, hey, thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So, I want to know how it is you got into Renegade Game Studio. I know you do a lot of projects for a bunch of different companies. You've worked in the comic industry, you're a graphic designer, and things like that. How did that work out?
So right as we were finishing the Snake Hunt run on Real American Hero, we had wrapped up 275, and that was coming out. We had a little bit of a downtime, like maybe just a couple of months. And then through a friend, Renegade had reached out to us in January, or I think it was December of 2020, and we had started production on the deck building game. And so they just kind of reached out and said we wanted to have you on the project, and we kind of worked out contracts and then got started right away. So it started with the cover, is the first thing we started working on for the first game. The first installment, and then it was a list of deliverables. So we had 50 cards that were mostly the mission cards. So Renegade, as soon as they get the licensing rights to G.I. Joe or any of the properties, they get access to the full catalog of all the art that's ever been produced through all the comics or anything else. And so they can include that in the game. They have every right to include that. But when they have a specific either mission, concept, or a character that they can't find just the right piece for, they'll commission a piece of art from artists specific to the game. So then that's what we were hired on to do. We had a list of 50 deliverables for that game to take care of. And so I was penciling and inking the cards, and then I had pulled Brian on to do the cover, or the colors. And so we had started on the cover first, and then I had taken care of the colors after that.
Which was interesting because on Snake Hunt, Robert was doing pencils and I was doing inks.
Right.
And so that was a ton of fun. And I remember it was like, because that was a rush at the end to finish up that Snake Hunt. And so it was just like, had a couple breathers, and Robert's like, hey, want to do some more G.I. Joe? And I was like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a ton of fun. It was the first board game that I've gotten to work on, so that was really neat.
What is your relationship with Renegades? Have they been cool? Are they a fun company to work? Because it seems like they are. The videos and YouTube stuff that I've seen of them when they've done the fan events and stuff like that have been pretty interesting.
I've worked with a couple different companies before, both in role-playing games and board games. I'd worked with IDW on their Ninja Turtle board games, and those were mostly just editors in the IDW staff that worked on special projects would then project manage the board games. And then they would run a Kickstarter or just get it manufactured. And that was my first kind of iteration of a deck building game or board game. And then Renegade, it was just kind of that times 10. It was just a bigger production team. It was not necessarily more or less organized, but it was just so much more focused on gaming. So therefore, every aspect of it was a bit more pinpointed towards what we want to get done. And
well, that was one thing that was interesting was with Renegade games is especially for the starter pack, and then the first maybe even a couple expansion sets. I hadn't even talked to anybody at Renegade, like Gene Torres, who was the art director. Robert was my art director, even though he wasn't an art director. And so, because, like the way that, for them it's more streamlined, I guess, to have one artist that hands them the deliverables, or the finished files and stuff. But it worked out really nicely later on, getting to meet them and talk with them. But yeah, mainly it was, my interaction was just Robert, and so that's always pleasant.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you can work with your family. I don't have the same experience working with my family. Obviously, you have a very good relationship. If you could work with, we know each other too well when you work with the family. You know the little needle and things that gets you. Stuff like that. I'm sure you guys have that.
Well, that's
too.
also been a benefit. So one thing that's been great is Robert taught me how to draw. comics and all that stuff. And so since I was able to like, I'd since kind of like veered over and done more coloring work and done stuff for that sort. So, but it's really great because I know a lot of how Robert thinks about how a scene is going to be, or how, you know, like I can just, I don't know. I feel like whenever I work with Robert, I don't have to think much. It's because a lot of times with other artists, you know, I gotta be like, well, what were they really wanting, or if I did this, would they mind or not? With Robert, I'm just like, I know how to go. I can just hit the ground running.
Backhand, or whatever they call it, because we've worked with him before.
Yeah, he'll backhand me if I don't do it right.
Not backhand. You know, it is a backhand, like understanding communication.
Right. The difference is I'm bigger now than he is.
That's true.
He is big.
It's really flip-flopped since we were in middle school. Yeah, so it does help a lot. We kind of have a shorthand in how we talk, and he knows what I'm going for because we render in a similar way when it comes to line art. So when he's inking over me, then that is helpful. I can now, it's gotten to the point where I can just do layouts and Brian will do my finishes. And he can finish in the way that I expect, and I know that came through with us working together on Real American Hero. And then in the coloring, it's like we've again worked together long enough that I have a general idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. And inevitably we go through, you know, maybe one or two passes, but even Renegade knows what they're going to get from Brian, and so they've even held off production from time to time because they're like, we want Brian to work on this. Like, we don't want you to get anybody else. Like, we want Brian's colors for this cover. And I'm like, okay, great. So then they're willing to pause production just to make sure he gets it.
That's gotta
and
be...
meanwhile, I'm like, well, I'll see what I can get.
Yeah, but no, that's
if I
gotta
got
make
time,
you feel
I'll
good,
throw you a bone, Renegade.
Yeah. But, yeah, that's got to be pretty good that they are happy with your work and they want you to do more work and they are holding stuff off. That's pretty good when a company does stuff like that because the confidence is there.
Well, that's one thing that's been great about Renegade. So, like, previously they had done like Power Rangers, Heroes of the Grid, and they had got Dan Mora, who was drawing Power Rangers book previous to that, you know, and then for some Transformers work, they went to Brian Shearer. For G.I. Joe, you know, they came to us and we had just hopped off of the, you know, the Snake Hunt run and things of that sort, and so, which I think is a smart move for them. And then also, like, you don't have to coach the artist on the property. You know?
That was a big deal because as we got from the main first game that came out, we did that all ourselves. But then as we got into the first expansion set, we're juggling other jobs and then trying to get this done. I had to pull in other artists. And so I got Marshall Hinson, who was a student who graduated from SCAD where I teach, and Kyle Petchak, who's another wonderful artist online. You can find his work on Instagram and Twitter. And then I'm trying to think who else we got. There's a few other. Brian Shearer did a few cards as well on the Joe games, but
Ben Sawyer was another one that I got.
so he got a couple other colorists on the cards, and so. But the downside to that, and they're phenomenal artists, but they weren't as familiar with the property. And so I was having to kind of send out briefs on, like, these are the characters, here's a few other versions of them.
Here's some pictures, here's some...
I know, I had to put a little dossier for each character on who they are, and here's sometimes the color scheme of where to pick, because there's so many versions throughout. I mean, we all know, there's so many versions between the 80s and Rise of Cobra line, the 25th anniversary line, and then modern classified lines, which from Hasbro, they call it the Evergreen Style Guide. They send out for that is the equivalent to the classified line. And they say stick to this whenever it's possible, but they don't have a version of that character out yet for everybody, right? So we can't stick to that for everybody.
270 characters in the original 82 and 94.
Exactly. So then it's up to us to try and pick and choose from all the previous iterations what makes the most sense or looks the most recognizable, isn't too out there. You know, we're not going to just grab some random Tiger Force, you know, version and throw it in there. So
Fun school version.
Yeah,
right?
I know. And so
Destro,
exactly.
You know.
Now, luckily, I know that because I grew up on it, because I worked on it for so long, and so I can hit the ground running, and I know what to pick and choose. And usually, it's we only have to do one pass. But then when I pull in somebody who's never worked on it before, there's a really steep learning curve, and it's hard to find somebody who can just jump onto the property. Chris Capana was another artist, and And I mean, he's a great artist, but he really kind of found that to be a struggle early on, to be like, he's way more into He-Man and a number of other properties. And so for G.I. Joe, while he likes the property, he had to find a lot of this reference, and I was trying to help him get on board.
Well, even me, I remember, so I'm not as familiar with G.I. Joe as obviously Robert is, and via Robert, I've, over the years become more accustomed with it and working on it. And but I remember there was one point whenever we had drawn Firefly coming out of an event, and it was like rappelling down. I colored him as Beachhead.
Yeah.
I completely colored the whole card as
How
Beachhead.
could you have done this?
Yeah, and Robert's like, oh, that's Firefly. I'm like, God.
Yeah.
The nice thing was he just desaturated all the green, and you're like,
That's
there's
pretty good.
Firefly.
Yeah, there you go.
It's all green.
That's not too bad. Because all the linear details were accurate. It was just like he had made it a green camo instead of a gray. I was like, all right. Yeah. So
Luckily, they look very similar.
exactly.
Unfortunately,
I can see how you get it mixed up.
Yeah. Unless you use version 2 of Firefly, which is my favorite, which everybody hates, but that's okay. Because it's the cool, Predator, where he can blend in with the environment around him, that outfit that he has. And he kind of took that from Zartan, that guy, but they never really used it a lot, but that's my favorite. So what has the response been from Renegade and the fan base and the world at large? Because it seems like that first game blew out the boundaries of what they were expecting from everything I saw and heard, and now we're getting constant stuff on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I know the first game sold well, and because they immediately already had in the works before it even hit the stands, the first expansion. Then they got pre-order sales. They immediately put into the works the second expansion, and we had just started on that when they were going to put out the board game, the Mission Critical board game.
Kickstarter, right?
And then, which is kind of based off the Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid game mechanics.
Yeah.
And then they paused our production on the third expansion of the deck building game. And each one of those expansions is almost as large as the initial game. So like just as many cards. So they are huge expansions.
Well, for the expansions, you need custom, specific to the game.
Good morning, Joe Fest. Welcome, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good time.
We're back.
Okay, so we were talking about the Mission Critical board game was coming out, and so they had us pause the expansion sets so the board game could get wrapped so they could do the Kickstarter on that. As soon as that got finished, we went back to the third expansion, finished that.
That's when I tapped out.
Yeah, that's when we were just like, we were just beat.
Initially, it was like, Robert's like, yeah, it's going to be a game and an expansion set. And I was like, great. But then the response was so good. And they're just like, okay, we need more of these. And then, so I would finish one set and Robert's like, okay, so so we got the next set coming up that we got to do. And I'm like, next set? There's more?
Yeah.
And then we started working on that and he's like, okay, so we need to jump over to this. And I was like, another game?
Yeah. So they have,
it just kept, it's been great.
Yeah. So there's the initial game, then the Shadow of the Serpent, which was announced with the Serpentor. That's the first expansion. Then Cold Snap, which is like a weather dominator, and kind of Arctic Joes get introduced, and there's like a lot of Dreadnoks in there, which was a fun cover to color.
That was
sure. Which is a lot of colors going on in that cover. And then, so those are the two main huge expansions. And then they're doing smaller pack expansions like the Dawn, and there's a few others. But those will be more like 20 card sets, 30 card sets. That'll be kind of smaller. Then the Mission Critical was the board game set. That also came with its own smaller expansion too, because we did a second cover for that.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, I mean, I can only say so much as far as like what they want to announce when it comes out, but there is more in the works in regards to both the deck building set and the board game sets. They do have more planned.
Did you touch on any of the RPG stuff?
Okay, so this is when
I slide.
I know, no, it's fine. What that first spring that I was working on the very first deck building game, and before we started the first expansion, Shadow of the Serpent, the role-playing game office reached out to me to start doing illustrations for the handbook. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll fit that in. Because I was like, more G.I. Joe, let's do it. So I started doing the illustrations, and I had the list of deliverables for Shadow of the Serpent, but I was like, well, I'll just set that aside because that deadline's not till later in the summer, and I started working on the RPG illustrations. And they had a list of about 25 illustrations for me to do. And this is on top of the 50 cards they wanted me to do in a cover. And I was like, well, I guess they all know about this. That's a lot of work. It's going to take me like a year to finish. And so I was still working full time, and they knew that. But then as it came to find out, even though Renegade is the same company, each of these departments are very separate from each other. And they didn't know that they were both hiring me at the same time.
Wow.
And then so I had been focusing on the RPG stuff, and the deck building game was like, hey, so we haven't heard from you in a while. Like, do you have any cards or the cover for us to look at? Yeah. I'm like, no, I've been working on the role-playing game stuff. Didn't you know I was working on this? They're like, no, nobody told us. I was like, don't you guys talk to each other? And they're like,
so that started the
we'll get back to
Renegade
you.
Battle of 2020.
I know exactly. Yeah, there's a giant rumble in the parking lot. Yeah. No, so everything was great. I mean, they were actually very nice about it, and they're wonderful about it. And they were just like, okay, no, just let us know as soon as you're finished with that, we'll get started back on the deck building game. And they extended our deadline, and they're really wonderful about it. But it did put us in a crunch late summer because of that. So if I could go back and do it, I would have, I don't know, just offset the schedule a little bit more or brought in help sooner on the second expansion. If I'd have known, you know, so it would have just changed our schedules a little bit. But I'm glad I got to work on both. It gave me an opportunity to work with Ross Persichetti, who was the colorist on all of the role-playing game stuff that he did, and I was able to see my work.
Different look.
Yeah, exactly. I've never seen my work kind of finished that way. So that was really
definitely
cool.
look different from what I've seen pictures of. I don't have mine in hand yet, but it did look different.
Yeah, it's just that finished digital paint, you know, kind of version of stuff, and it's kind of a neat finish and a neat polish to it. So
whereas like a lot of times with the comic book art, you know, it's like the colors kind of put a polish and shine to it, and put like you know, it gives an atmosphere, you know, to his line art. But his line art is still shining through, whereas with the digital paints, it's almost like thinking of it as the skeleton.
Yeah,
because his lines are gone by the time he's done painting
over
it.
Yeah.
So like make it more three-dimensional, like,
oh, for sure,
like more realistic, because that's what it looked like. It didn't look like, it looked like maybe a Hector Burrito.
Yeah, the best way to think is Robert draws the skeleton, and then he builds out, you know, like
interesting.
Yeah,
that's definitely unique and different. But you want to have different stuff. You don't want everything to look the same. Even though you have a fantastic style, I've loved it for years. Yeah, you kind of get a little bit.
I think it works great for the RPG books.
Yeah.
I mean, having played D&D for years and things of that sort, and having the monster manuals, and those have a certain look and feel to them, and I think Renegade did an excellent job from everything I've seen on that.
And then it was interesting in both projects. It got to the point sometimes where deadlines, I've mentioned that a few times, deadlines definitely got tight throughout the projects, where they're like, okay, we're short 3 or 4 pieces or half a dozen pieces, whatever it was. Do you have any unpublished artwork that we could put into this game that you already have done? And I was like, yeah, I've been doing commissions for years, you know what I mean? And so
hundreds and hundreds of
I was like, here's 40 characters to choose from, what do you want? And so in the role-playing game, there's probably 6 pieces that were just people's private commissions that got digitally painted and put into the role-playing game. So when they flip through it, the Flint piece where he's running, the snow job piece where he's skiing down the slopes, it got digitally painted over and is in the role-playing game. So their private commission is in the role-playing game, is now a published piece of artwork. In the deck building game, the Serpentor piece.
So they got to steal on that commission.
I know, it's like basically their commission just like tripled in value.
Yeah.
And so that's happened a few times. This was actually a commission first before it became a cover for the IDW book. That's happened another half a dozen times too throughout the IDW series. There was a bunch of pieces that were somebody's commissioned first. IDW's like, oh my gosh, we need to cover tomorrow. Do you have anything that'll work? I was like, yeah, Simon's already colored this. Here you go. And then it just became a cover the next day. You know.
Well, and that's the thing about these type of things, especially when you're in the graphic design world and the commercial world. There's deadlines, and there's a lot more money at stake than a normal independent comic company or whatever. From what I understand, background with the people that have interviewed and stuff. So you have to be more professional about these things and deal with this stuff a lot more than you would, like, say, Jim Shooter came to you. Yeah, can you get this to me by next week or whatever?
Yeah.
You have to have it tomorrow, or they're like thousands of dollars at stake for these projects.
Yeah.
So the response.
I mean, we're still us. We're
Yeah. I mean, we still procrastinate as long as
we will
possible.
get deadlines. It's a flexible concept at times,
Yeah.
but we'll make it happen.
Well, everybody's a human being.
Yeah.
Stuff comes up and stuff like that. Trust me, talking to Robert about doing this interview, it's been fun trying to figure it out. But I'm glad it worked out in the end and stuff like that. And the fans seem to be really, really happy. I love the game. I'm looking forward to all the expansion. I was I don't know what you call the card game, deck building game fan in the 90s when it just blew up. You had the Pokemon game, the World of Warcraft, Magic and stuff, and then they started doing Star Wars and Star Trek. So I know all those things, and I was a fan of them. But it's hard to keep up with. There's all kinds of exclusives, there's rare cards, blah, blah, blah. And some of those Pokemon cards go for millions of dollars now. It's ridiculous.
Well, they certainly got
But
content planned and in the works and stuff. So.
So it's going to go for a while then. Because I've always said, why don't they do a G.I. Joe game? There's things that just strike you that, like, why isn't this out there? Why can't someone figure this out?
Well, it takes a third-party company like Renegade. Scott Gata is the owner-operator of Renegade, and it takes somebody who has those resources, has the infrastructure of a company that's already producing, who has a love for the property. Ultimately, that's what it takes. Hasbro, as a license, a license holder, it's not like they have anything against it, but they're not a game maker. They're a toy manufacturer, so they're not going to have the infrastructure to get that made. But if there is a game manufacturer that's interested, like Scott has a passion for G.I. Joe, they were finally in a position to go ahead and pay those licensing rights, get the property, and then put it out there. And it just finally came around.
But Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast that does Magic.
Oh, for sure. And so it's not to say that it couldn't have happened, but I think, it's they can sell out, or they can sell that licensing rights.
Turns out Wizards of the Coast is pretty busy.
Yeah, doing what they do.
Making their thing.
Yeah, that's true. With a lot of the new movement at Hasbro and stuff like that, it seems like they are I won't say giving, they are releasing the license to a lot more companies, a lot more manufacturers and things like that, and we're getting a much wider variety of products than I could say at least 5 years prior to that. IDW had the comics, and yes, there was Hasbro was doing product toys, but there really wasn't much else going on.
That's true.
Definitely. Well, I mean, especially with the anniversary and everything else coming up, but I think that Hasbro's really smart with how they handle those licenses and things of that sort. So while there is more, I feel like the content, the quality has remained.
Yeah. And they're hitting something for everybody, a flavor for everybody, because obviously we're all kids probably in the 80s and 90s, maybe? I don't want to assume anything.
No, that's right. Yep.
But yeah, toys were much more accessible. You can get a G.I. Joe for $1.50, you can get a vehicle for $20.
Right.
Today, a vehicle costs you $100, a figure is $25.
Right.
But they did those little dollar store toys and stuff for the kids for that price.
But that's why you come here.
Yeah,
You'll
exactly.
find those deals, right?
Yeah. So you said they're going to continue. They have stuff in the pipeline for the future and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can pre-order the expansions now, and then those will come out in the fall. Those first two main expansions, and then they have plans for the next couple subsequent years, and stuff's currently in production for things that they'll announce pretty soon.
And you're on that for the foreseeable future?
At least we're doing covers, and I know that we've gotten people that have worked on the previous expansions are doing the main card art for the next couple things. We're spent on the card art, but we're still on covers for the next few things. So.
Some of those covers are really, really cool. The
Just
sequential
turned in a
covers,
cover
cold snap
yesterday.
covers.
Yeah, so we just wrapped
Really
one up,
cool.
and we got another one to do this week. So.
I know people love that initial game cover. They've done puzzles of it, and
I do love that
t-shirts.
they did jigsaw puzzles. For that.
Yeah, I think they're cool. I don't want to put my puzzle together though. I want to keep it in the thing. I'm a mint to package type of guy. So, is there any other projects that you guys would like to let the fans know that you're working on?
Well,
coming
we
up?
have one other Joe-related, like tertiary-related project with Action Force Redux, because we had launched that. Well, we had started on it a year and a half ago, and so Jim Marshall is kind of the editor, kind of production manager, and not editor, well, I guess, and writer of that. And I was doing pinups and a short story that Brian's taken over, and so that kind of deals with, kind of Baron and all the Red Shadows and Nightmare as a character is the story that Brian's working on, and Hawk Sanders with Rising Sun is here at Joe Fest, and so those books are finally coming out, the stuff that we worked on, and so those can be ordered, and hopefully that production will be expanded a bit more, and so we can get the word out about that. And so that's one project that, again, we had a chance to work on initially, and Brian's taken over, which is great. And doing some awesome pages for that. And then you've got other projects in there too.
Yeah, so I'm working on Source Point for the Family Graves, who was published by Source Point Press previously. So it's kind of like the Fantastic Four, but they're monsters.
Yeah.
Instead of superheroes.
And you're the first graphic novel or trade of that.
Yeah, first trade is out, and so working on some more of that right now, and then aside from that, just working on some, whenever Robert sends my way on different projects.
So we're working on some, I don't know what all we can say. Basically, artwork related to a video game series called Wild Card through Playful Game Studios. So.
Based on the novels.
No. So it's just there's a video game studio based out of Texas that's done like Lucky's Tale and Super Lucky's Tale, Creativerse, a number of other video games, and they're coming out with a new video game called Wild Card, and you can go to playfulstudios.com and check out that game. And so we're doing artwork related to that, and that's another project that'll come out later this year.
If the folks would like to reach out to you and maybe get some commissions or something like that, or find out what you're doing, is there a place that they can go?
For me, it's mostly Robert Atkins Art on Instagram or Twitter is usually the best way to follow my work, or kind of send me a message, and then that gets directed to my email. And then
to make it super confusing but also easy, it's just Brian Atkins Art. Just put in Atkins Art,
and one of the two of us will pop up.
Yeah. For the future, is there any appearances that you guys are going to be making that the fans can come out and get commissions and talk to you about your work and get autographs and see you in the future?
Yeah, so I'll be in kind of a order of chronological appearance. I'll be in C2B2 in Chicago in August, then at Dragon Con in Atlanta at the beginning of September, 1st through the 5th, and then in New York Comic Con in October, the 6th through the 9th. So that'll be enough for me. I'll be done for the year.
Okay.
For me this year, I think I'm done going and seeing people. I got to sit at my desk and get some work done is what I need to do. But yeah, next year I'm looking to get my shows lined up or whatever, but I'm working on that right now.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate both of you taking the time to speak to me. Is there anything you'd like to say to the fans before we head out?
No, I appreciate it. It's been awesome being here at Joe Fest. Like we've had a really great opportunity to be here. This is the first time we've been together at a show to kind of represent the G.I. Joe work we've done together. I was really hoping we could do this last year, because it was right after our run on A Real American Hero, and it just didn't quite work out with the way the world was. So this has been really fun. Hopefully we'll be able to do this more often, where we get to set up together and kind of promote the G.I. Joe stuff we've done.
Well, this is very close to your hometown, so...
Yeah, I got lucky. This is like 2 hours away from where I live. We had to fly in halfway across the country.
Oh, man, it's difficult with a lot of the logistics nowadays.
Yeah.
So I feel for you.
Poor Brian.
It was worth it. It was great. I mean, especially for being my first Joe Fest. I mean, just all the support on all the different projects, and getting to meet a lot more of the Joe community has actually been a really wonderful experience the past couple of years.
And that's the thing that really is important to me, is the community. As much as I love the toys and G.I. Joe property, it's the community, talking to folks like Robert I've known for a long time, It's just very friendly. Everybody's very friendly, you know. And I love meeting you, and I appreciate you both taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah.